Verse 10 we start.
Chapter 25, verse 10, Numbers.
So I'm going to read my notes and then we'll make some comments as we go here. The official start of the Torah portion for this Shabbat begins in verse 10 of chapter 25. In order to really understand where the rest of chapter 25 is headed, we need the preceding verses, that is verses 1 through 9, for the underlying context. According to verses 1 through 3, the Israelites began to whore with the daughters of Moab, and the Torah clearly denounces harlotry in Leviticus 19:29 and Deuteronomy 22:21. By the way, I've said this before that idolatry and immorality are twin sisters. They go hand in hand. Anytime you find idolatry, you're going to find immorality somewhere close by. They go together, in the scriptures especially. In verse 3 of chapter 25 of Numbers, the words joined herself are used only here and in Psalms 106:28 and appear to have a sexual connotation. In verses 6 to 9, an Israelite man and a Moabite woman are having sex at the entrance to the door of the tent of meeting. When Aaron's grandson, Phinehas, saw this blatant display of idolatry and immorality, he picked up a spear and skewered the couple, killing them. He runs a spear through both of them. They are fornicating at the entrance of the tent of meeting, so obviously they're close together. And he just takes a spear, probably had to get a good running start to go through two people, and just skewers both of them.
Wait, where is that?
That's in
verse 6.
Verse 6. Yeah, 5 and 6. All right, so he basically just runs a spear through both of them. Now, it's interesting. The text says that they were weeping at the entrance of the tent of meeting. Here's one of those places where the scribes say that the text may have been somewhat tampered with. That most likely they were laughing at the entrance of the tent of meeting. Okay, they're laughing, not playing, not necessarily just not weeping, but this is where sensitivities to what's going on here. They just say that they were weeping, and maybe the opposite is actually going on. In the rabbinic literature, they talk about how it was probably the opposite. Now, here's what's interesting. You can't see this in what I want to pick up. Let me continue with this. When Aaron's grandson Phinehas saw this blatant display, for his zeal in defending the integrity of Israel's God, Phinehas is awarded a, quote, covenant of peace, which you can read about again in Isaiah 54:10 and Ezekiel 34. I'll give you those references. So it's interesting that Yod-Heh-Vav-Heh is pleased with him. Mm-hmm. He's pleased with what Phinehas does. However, you can only see this in the Masoretic text. The Masoretes are not happy with Phinehas. Anybody want to guess why?
Judge, jury, and executioner all in one.
Yeah, he's judge, jury, and executioner. He doesn't say, let's bring these guys before a tribal council or before the judges. Let's talk about this. He says, these two are obviously messed up, and they're causing all kinds of problems, and if I don't deal with it, God's going to deal with it, and in fact we know that God was dealing with it. And he just takes the command. I mean, he sees this happening and then just does something about it himself. And they say, we don't like that.
Vigilante justice.
Vigilante justice. Yeah, what if everybody takes the law in their own hands? What if people read this and say, well, if Phinehas does it, well, I can do it. So what they do is, the word shalom, on the word covenant of shalom, now they don't want to mess with they don't want to alter the text. However, you can do something with vowels. Okay? So for instance, on the word Adonai, when the scribes think that Adonai is Yahweh, they will put instead of a patak under the last letter, they'll put a kametz as a little tip-off to say, we think that this usage of Adonai isn't just any Adonai, this is the Adonai. This is Yod-Heh-Vav-Heh. Okay? So they change the vowel. You can change the vowel. Since the holom could be a vowel in the word shalom, they have sheen, lamed, holom, and then mem, final mem. They took and they scraped a little line between the top part of the vav and the bottom part of the vav to leave a gap. And they call it a broken vav on the word shalom, as a way of saying we're not happy with what Pinchas did. And so to tip you off, every time you see this word shalom, as you're reading it in the text, you'll see this broken vav, and that tells you, go to the marginal note and look, and you'll see that we're not happy. Read the note, the rabbinic note, that we're not happy with the fact that he took the Torah into his own hands.
Okay.
All right. Now, yes.
But in that case, that was really a specific, important location. So the other one's like, the zelo.
Yes. Right. See, I think it was, and I think the Lord thinks it was. And here's the thing. If you see somebody doing something evil, you can stop that evil. If it's in your immediate presence and they're right in front of you, I don't think you have to have judge, jury, and all that in order to defend yourself and to even do what's right. You know, and in this instance, it's clear where they are, what they're doing, and it's clear that the Lord he's pleased with Pinchas and says he did the right thing.
Because it's almost like a complete department.
Yes. Well, how blatant is it? How blatant is it if you have this Israelite with a Moabite, and they are having relations at the entrance of the tent of meeting, right in front of everybody? It's like, you know what? We're going to do this blatantly. We don't care what anybody thinks. We don't care what anybody believes, and just the audacity to do what they were doing, where they were doing it. And he just says, you know what? Enough of this. And just takes a spear and just runs through both. And it says that God stopped the plague because of this. He stopped the plague that was on Israel because of this type of nonsense that was going on. And he says to Pinchas, I'm going to give you an eternal priesthood. You're going to be in the priesthood. It's a good thing what he did. So, so there's times where, action doesn't require me saying, I wonder what a jury would think about this. Because it's so blatantly obvious what's going on that doing the right thing doesn't require a whole process.
They'd be like in a separate tent someplace.
Yeah, that'd be different. Yeah. But this is not one of those situations. This was pretty out there in front of everybody. Anybody who was around the situation could have seen, it's these two. So
it's interesting how, we've talked about this before, the things that we do as brothers and sisters that affect our brothers and sisters.
Yes. Yeah, we don't think this way in the West, that there's consequences, that my sin could have consequences for somebody else. We're very individualistic. We don't think in terms of community and in terms of how the bigger picture is affected by what I do. We just think, it only hurt me. I'm only hurting myself. Well, you might be hurting yourself, but you know what? There's really the possibility that you're also doing damage to the greater good. And most of us just don't think that direction, yes.
In verse 8, what chamber is it speaking of? And in verse 8 it says he followed them into the chamber and pierced them.
Oh, I thought it says, let me get my Bible here real quick. I thought it says they're at the entrance of the tent of meetings, so let me make sure just a second.
They were at the entrance, but I think he chased him.
Let me look at the word here real quick, see if I can figure out the word. Open already. You're in verse 8?
Yeah.
Okay. So, verse 8 reads, and he went after the man of Israel into the tent and thrust both them through, the man of Israel and the woman through her body. So, I'm not seeing the word chamber. Verse 10?
Tent.
Just tent.
Is it tent?
Yeah, just the word tent.
Okay. Yes.
Yeah. It's using the word opel for tent. Yeah. All right, so Now, second portion that I want to focus on, chapter 26. Chapter 26 deals with, as the whole chapter is on this census. You remember at the beginning of the book of Numbers, we had a census of the people. And what's fascinating is, at the end here, in chapter 26, after 40 years of wandering in the wilderness, 40 years, 1 year for every year for every day, they were in the land spying it out and did not take it. Measure for measure. So everybody 20 years of age and upward will die. Okay? Until we're going to wander the wilderness for 40 years till everybody dies. And what's fascinating is, when you look at the numbers, at this second census, we're now in the 40th year. The first census happened after the first year. They've lost a total of 1,820 fighting men. All that time. So I gave you the numbers. Here they are. Listen to this. So Reuben, firstborn, initially had 46,500. He ends up with 43,730 for a loss of 27,770. Simeon has the most loss, 59,300 in the first census, 22,200 in the second, for a loss of 37,100. Gad, first 45,650. The second census 40,500. He lost 5,150. Judah, in the first one 74,600. Second one 76,500 for a net gain of 1,900. Issachar, first 54,400. Second 64,300 for a net gain of 9,900.
Whoa.
Zebulun, first 57,400. Second census of the fighting men 60,500 for a net gain of 3,100. Zebulun, next one Manasseh, excuse me. First 32,200. The second one 52,700 for a net gain of 20,500. So, quite interesting. Ephraim has a net loss of 8,000. Benjamin has a net gain of 10,200. Dan has a net gain of 1,700. Asher has a net gain of 11,900. And Naphtali has a net loss of 8,000. So when you compare the two lists of those that died 40 years of age and older, from the first list to the second list, they lost a total of 1,820 in the census. Which says to me this, here was the theological point. And the reason why this chapter goes through this. You know what? I'm still going to be faithful to you, even in your disobedience. The numbers are not going to, did not go down significantly. So you're still going to have the men you need to go in and take the land. Even though you sinned, even though they had to die, the birth rates stayed essentially the same, such that the fighting men number didn't go down significantly. Over 40 years to only lose 1,820 in the numbers is minimal.
So Simeon had a lot of older folks.
Yeah, now here's the question we might want to ask. Why did some of them gain and why did some of them lose? And especially when you lose 37,000 on Simeon and you gain 20,000 with Manasseh. So what was your question?
The first census was taken because of the military point of view.
Yes.
But the second census wasn't because of the military.
Actually, the second census, I think, is military, the military men.
Okay.
According to the text. It looks like the text is saying to us that these are the fighting men. We can look at that again. Let's look at so Numbers 26, let's see here. Yeah, see, because if you look at verse 2, take a census of all the congregation of the children of Israel from 20 years old and above by their fathers' houses, all who are able to go to war in Israel. So according to chapter 26, it's those who are capable of, this isn't everybody in the land of Israel. This is just, according to this text, it's just the capabilities of the fighting men. As was Numbers chapter 1. So those who are able to go to war from 20 years and above. Yeah.
Yeah, so we can deduce by simple math that if they were in the wilderness 40 years and all these guys are between 20 and above, they're really between 20 and 40. So these are people in their 20s and 30s.
Yes.
I mean,
yeah.
But they were all under 20. in the second census, aren't they?
Well, yeah,
Because the older generation stayed and what allowed to go into the promised land.
Well, there were people who were probably,
19.
17, 18, 19 in the first census, so they're now past 20.
37, 38.
They're in the 37s, 35s, because if you were 15, and then you have 20 years, you're 35.
Is the census 40 years later? This is the,
No, the census is 39 years later.
so they're almost there in their 50s then. So anybody who's
Yeah.
close to fighting age is now well beyond fighting age and everything's close to 60 if they were close to 30. Because 39 years later.
Well, but those who were 20 years, when they went into Canaan, and the spies went in, he says from that point forward, we're going to wander the wilderness for 40 years until such time as all those who, when we went into the land, who are 20 years of age or older at that time, they will have to die off. So you'll be less than 60. Nobody's going to reach the age of 60, or maybe you reach 60, but that's the outer limits.
Pretty much anybody who was in fighting age is gone.
Yes.
And who's in fighting age in the second census was not born yet, or is not, or was just.
Or they were
born.
children.
No,
Children.
No, because
Yeah.
39 years later, if the fighting age between 20 and 40, 39 years,
I
anybody
thought it
who's
was
2 years old
20
is
and
out of
50.
fighting age.
Yeah.
So it's got to be everybody who's about to be born or be born in 20 years.
All right. So what I'm trying to show is that when we have the first one, and all those guys died, and then we have in the wilderness, and then we have the next census, that from in over 39 years, not that many people were lost that could fight for Israel. So what it shows to me is that God is being faithful to his people to give them what they need, because they're going to meet these guys when they go into the land of Canaan. All right. Now, chapter 27. One of the most interesting chapters that you will find, and for a whole lot of reasons. On the page I gave you, it says this. This chapter tells the story of a man named Zelophehad who had 5 daughters and no sons. The narrative tells us that after the death of their father, the 5 daughters appealed to Moshe as they will receive no inheritance land due to their gender. Without land to live on and plant a crop, the likelihood of surviving is slim. Okay? They're not married. That's another thing. The text also tells us, the 5 daughters had not married, so that all 5 were single. This narrative is intriguing for several reasons, but I want to focus on one angle for just a moment. Within traditional Orthodox Judaism, there is the bold claim that both the written Torah and the oral Torah were all given to Moshe while up on Mount Sinai. The claim goes that the written Torah was placed on tablets right away, while the oral Torah was written down later in what would become known as the Mishnah, and then coupled with the Gemara became the Talmud. Our narrative today has Moshe going back to God to find out what he should do with the 5 daughters of Zelophehad. If the tradition about the oral Torah is true, then Moshe should have immediately told the 5 daughters that the decision they were seeking had already been given by Yehovah, and promptly told them how Yehovah had decided in their favor. Instead, Moshe goes back to God and asks him for a ruling in this situation. While the rabbinic tradition states that by this time, Moshe had already been given everything he needed to know. I believe the rabbinic writings often give us good historical background information and even exegetical insights into the biblical text. Please note that. However, I do believe we should be careful as the foundational pillar of rabbinic Judaism, an unbroken chain of transmission, rests on evidence that will not bear the weight of scrutiny. Okay? It just doesn't work out. 4 times alone, this one and 3 other instances, we have individuals who come to Moses and say, hey Moses, what are we supposed to do here? And Moses goes, I don't know. Okay? And so he says, I'll go back to God and find out what we're supposed to do. And he goes back to the tent of meeting and says, okay, God, here's the situation. What do you want us to do? And God says, do this and write it down. And write it down. And they do. Now, if Moses has already gotten all this oral tradition up on Mount Sinai, if he's already gotten all this revelation, as we're supposed to believe that he already has, then he should just say, oh, well, that's already been decided, no problem. I'll just tell you what we've already talked about. He doesn't say that. He says, I got to go back to God and find out. So this notion that there's an unbroken chain of oral transmission doesn't work because the Torah itself says, no, he has to go back to God several times to find out what he's supposed to do. Let me explain it this way. Let me say it this way. I will say this, though. The best man-made religion is Orthodox Judaism by far. It is the best man-made religion by far. The only one problem is what I just said. It's man-made. And that's a problem. We have to get back to the scriptures themselves and say, what does the text say? What do the scriptures say? And I can show you over and over in the rabbinic literature where they do all kinds of gymnastics and all kinds of explanations for things that you just say to yourself, wow, this just goes way off the reservation in order to make this work. So, I'll give you an example of this kind of thing, or the kind of things I'm talking about. How many of you know what a bat kol is? A bat kol. What a bat kol is? Bat means daughter, and kol means voice. Okay, so a daughter voice means when somebody says they have heard from God out of heaven. Okay, a bat kol. So that means God directly speaks to somebody out of heaven. Well, we get to the prophetic literature, the Nevi'im, and the prophets are hearing from God. They're hearing from God in visions. They're hearing from God in dreams. And sometimes they just hear from God. It just says they heard from God. And can you think of an example of this kind of thing in the apostolic scriptures? Where we have a bat kol, a voice from heaven. Huh? Mary actually gets visited by Miriam gets visited by an angel. So that's not actually a bat kol. Yes.
Yeshua's baptism?
Yes, Yeshua's baptism.
Yes.
Absolutely. And this says this voice comes out of heaven and says, "This is my beloved Son, in whom I am well pleased. Listen to him." That's a bat kol, right? Authenticating his identity and his mission and everything he's. Yeah.
Would Paul's conversion, would that be one?
Very close. Yes, exactly. That kind of, yes, Paul has this, he's stricken with light first, and then this voice from heaven says to him, "Paul, Saul, Saul, why do you persecute me?" Yes, that's a bat kol. This voice from heaven. Now, in the text, it only tells us that Paul can hear it. The others around him don't hear the voice. He hears it. So it's interesting, though, that you're right. That's another example of this bat kol.
Mount Transfiguration.
Mount of Transfiguration. Same type of thing happens. This voice from heaven says, this is the one, right? Okay. So now you're getting the idea. And we have a number of these in the Hebrew Scripture, and we have a number of these in the Apostolic Scripture. What's interesting, though, is the Mishnah says we have to shut off revelation. There is no more prophetic revelation, and so they say that we can no longer decide anything from a bat kol. Okay, no decision can ever be rendered because the decision has to come from us down here, with God working with us down here. We don't want to give credence to any more, because here's why. There's somebody who's going to come along and go, "Hey, I heard a voice from God. Now nobody else heard it, but I heard it. He spoke to me, and this is what he said." And then everybody's going to say, "Well, I guess we have to go with what Bob says. Because Bob heard this voice. Bob heard God. Well, if Bob hears from God, then we got to go with what Bob said." Here's the problem. It's hard to verify that God actually spoke to Bob. We have to take his word for it. Unless it happens in a group of people, like we see with the Transfiguration. In all these instances, we have kind of witnesses around that say, yeah, they heard it too, or they were involved in the situation. I've told you, I've had many, many people throughout times of ministry who have said to me, "I heard from the Lord. I got a word from the Lord." You go, "What did the Lord say?" "Well, the Lord wants me to divorce my husband because he's just not been a nice guy." "Well, lady, I'm sorry, but that's not a reason for, unless there's more to this. That in and of itself isn't a good enough reason to just divorce. Just because you guys aren't getting along right now. That in and of itself, well, the Lord told me. I had a voice from the Lord. Now, I'm not saying the Lord doesn't speak, but I'm saying this. When he does speak, it's always in conjunction with his word. And we have to govern it by what the word says, not by what we think individually.
Well,
This is where community, we come back to community. Community has to help us evaluate and adjudicate in these areas as well.
So God isn't schizophrenic after
No.
all? I'll be done.
Yes.
Huh.
Wasn't it Pat Robinson that heard from the Lord that he was supposed to build the university or something?
No, that was Oral Roberts. Yeah, Oral Roberts heard from the Lord that if he didn't get $1 million for this, for the building he wanted to build, that God was going to kill him. Thankfully, the money came in, and he built the building, and okay. But you're kind of going, really? This is one of those kind of things that makes you go,
Don't you want to do it for the Lord?
So it's kind of, that's why I think we have to be cautious and say, okay. So I'm just showing you, this is one example where the rabbi said, we can't have any more bot cold. It's got to cease, and we can no longer use this, even though we see them in the apostolic scriptures as well. All right, all that to say, I think our movement is working to get people back to Torah, and I'm all for Torah, written Torah.
Amen.
Because here's what happens. As soon as we go outside that and say, well, now the authority lies in what Rabbi so-and-so said about Rabbi so-and-so, about Rabbi so-and-so, we're taking man-made rulings and man-made decisions and asserting that these come from God. I'll give you an example of this. When this Siddur was in process of being worked on, myself and another individual did not like the fact that in the Shabbat service for the evening, the Erev Shabbat service, it said this: the only blessing in there for lighting the candles said, let me see if I can find it now. Yeah, page 7.
It's a
Here it is. It
commandment.
said this: here's a traditional blessing. By the way, I want to say this: I love lighting candles. I think lighting candles are a wonderful tradition. They're a wonderful, wonderful tradition. Did you hear what I called them? Tradition. Okay, and I do it. I love the tradition. So, but here's how the blessing goes. The blessing says, "Blessed are you, Adonai, our God, King of the universe, who sanctified us with his commandments." So far, so good. And commanded us to kindle the lights of the Sabbath. I don't know. Where did command that? That's in rabbinics. So myself and another individual, who shall remain nameless, we penknifed into our Siddur a different prayer. And it said this, and so it's on the bottom here, the one, it went to print with this one. It says, "Blessed are you, Adonai, our God, King of the universe, who sanctified us with his commandments and commanded us to sanctify the Sabbath." Now that's what he commanded us to do. Now, you can use candles as a part of that process, but when I was questioned, he said, well, but the tradition says we should say the first one. I said, okay, hold on. Are you going to tell me that 6 million Jews who died in